Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your location. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 13 of the KMG Show. So let's start with coronavirus and let's look at the markets. Uh, Not so good. Dow tanks more than 950 points as Wall Street's roller coaster week continues. And I see that the VIX, which is supposedly what the panic index or the fear index, is up 7.63, up 24% today. According to the New York Post, Dow plunges 969 points as coronavirus fears return. Another day, another gut-wrenching swing in stocks. The blue chip index sank as much as 1,034 points earlier today as new coronavirus cases popped up in New York. Airliners warned of plummeting revenues, and yet another Carnival cruise ship got barred from returning to port after passengers fell ill. As investors fled to the relative safety of bonds, the yield on the benchmark 10-year U.S. Treasury note fell to a record low of 0.904%. The tumble hit shares of banks, which relied on interest rates for profit. The rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage fell to a record low of 3.29%. I'm wondering about coronavirus and how much of a panic it's having in the United States. It seems to be restricted overwhelmingly to places which have a lot of traffic with China, such as the Seattle suburb of Kirkland, which appears to be ground zero in the state of Washington. Such is the nature of the internet age that people want, they want big news every 24 hours. And if they don't get big news within 24 hours, there's a tendency to say, this is boring, and let's move on to something else. Let's see, my own province of British Columbia announced its 13th case of coronavirus, woman in critical condition. Now, the curious thing, well, it's not actually curious, it's the same as everywhere else, that all of the cases of coronavirus that have been reported in British Columbia are from people who have just returned from China or Iran. So the obvious solution would be to quarantine these people or to restrict travel, or perhaps to cease travel between Canada and Iran and China. But no. Our philosophy king idiot, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, is not going to do that. He will not ban foreign travelers arriving from countries grappling with coronavirus, adding that knee-jerk reactions won't help to stop the spread of the virus. Canada's approach differs from the protocols adopted by some of our closest allies, reports the CBC. Donald Trump has claimed the United States is experiencing a low number of infections because it sealed its borders. Trump tweeted this morning, with approximately 100,000 coronavirus cases worldwide and 3,280 deaths, the United States, because of quick action on closing our borders, has, as of now, only 129 cases, 40 Americans brought in, and 11 deaths. We are working very hard to keep these numbers as low as possible. Australian PM Scott Morrison announced Thursday that coronavirus-related travel bans on foreigners coming from China and Iran will be extended to South Korea. Australian citizens and permanent residents from those countries can enter Australia, but will be required to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Well, what if they don't? Trudeau was asked today if Canada would take similar steps. He said, quote, "We recognize there are countries that make different decisions. The decisions we make are based on the best recommendations of the World Health Organization and the tremendous health experts who work within Canada and around the world. We know that keeping Canadians safe needs to be done in the right way, and we're going to keep doing things that actually keep Canadians safe. There is a lot of misinformation out there. There is a lot of knee-jerk reaction that isn't keeping people safe. that is having real challenging impacts on communities, on community safety. I have no idea what the last two sentences mean. These knee-jerk reactions are having real challenging impacts on communities, on community safety. I suspect that he's talking about what the World Health Organization and others has called the real deadly epidemic, which of course is stigma. There are now 45 confirmed cases of coronavirus in Canada, 21 in BC, 22 in Ontario, and 2 in Quebec. Trudeau said the government's approach is to inform Canadians on how best to protect their families and to act on the advice of health experts to develop a response that is active and up to date every step of the way. During a briefing with reporters Wednesday, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, said again that sealing off borders is not an effective approach to containing the virus. She said border measures work better when they focus on educating travelers about the symptoms and what they should do if they get sick. Now, Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's Chief Public Officer, was talking about stigmatization right from the get-go. Now, I'm sure that it's completely irrelevant that Dr. Tam is Han Chinese, that she was actually born in China, and I suppose it's completely irrelevant that Justin Trudeau owes the fact that he was elected Prime Minister and remains Prime Minister to minority voters. Certainly he wouldn't want to be accused of racism or white supremacism or ginning up fears of a new yellow peril. No, God, no, not Justin Trudeau. But I'm sure that I'm sure that he has only the best wishes for Canadians. Dr. Tam said, "We believe that travelers and Canadians are quite sensitized, so they're presenting to the health system in a very appropriate way, being fully alerted." It's also a balance for the health system. There has to be some guidance as to how you triage patients going through the health system. The border is actually a great place to tell them which phone numbers to call ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, this is based on the assumption that people who have been exposed or likely to have been exposed to the coronavirus are going to do the right thing. Now, why would we expect them to do so, especially considering the stigma attached to the coronavirus? And yes, were you in China recently? No, I was not in China or Iran. Unless the government is going to, seize records, how would they even know this? But again, Canada is the most progressive country in the world, and we're not going to let a global pandemic stand in the way of fighting racism. ZERP forever. Now, I think that ZERP, that's zero interest rate policy, overall is a bad thing, but it is part and parcel of capitalism 2.0, which replaced the original version of capitalism circa the year 2000. Again, the old capitalism, people saved money, loaned it to banks at interest, and the banks loaned that money out to businesses starting up or expanding at higher interest. Saving is bad. Saving causes sclerosis. Too bad for all those old people who based their retirement on the idea of saving because you're not getting any money when you put your money in the bank anymore. But I have been saying for close to a decade that there is no turning back from ZERP. Now, other people, seemingly more expert than I, said that, well, yes, of course, the federal banks are going to raise the prime rate. We're going to achieve or get back or closer to normalcy. No, ZERP is the new normal. That if interest rates rise, then businesses and particularly governments will find it impossible to pay the interest on their stupendous debt. If interest rates were to rise to historical norms, counties, municipalities, states would face bankruptcy. So that's not going to happen. Also, the economy would, yes, arteriosclerosis would take over the economy. So there has to be all of this new money created, flowing through, and loaned out for practically nothing to the right customers, of course, not to me or thee. And I just don't see that changing. I don't see that changing unless there is some sort of economic catastrophe, or alternately, when manna starts raining from heaven. I think that's the plan. I think that's the plan out of the emergency that began in the year 2007, that God is going to look down at us with benevolence, and all of the structural problems which now plague us economically are going to miraculously disappear. So let's talk about the Democratic nomination now. And it all happened so fast. It's all over bar the drooling. That's my joke. And the drooling, of course, refers to the almost certain nominee of the Democratic Party, who is Joe Biden. Now, we have a primary coming up in Michigan, and of course, Bernie Sanders won in Michigan in 2016, and it doesn't look like he is going to win this time because of, the big Mo, I suppose, would be one reason, but also because Joe Biden is the answer to the Democratic Party's prayers, or so they see it. And Joe Biden apparently is beloved of Black people who dominate Democratic Party primary voters. According to Politico, Super Tuesday weekend to Bernie Sanders, Michigan may break him. It was Michigan where Sanders engineered a primary day miracle 4 years ago, upsetting Hillary Clinton and imprinting his populist agenda on the industrial Midwest. The result not only presaged Clinton's inability to win over white working-class voters in the general election, but underpinned Sanders' argument that in running again, he could succeed where Clinton failed in a race against Donald Trump. Even before Sanders' woebegone Tuesday, marked by losses to Joe Biden throughout the South and in Massachusetts and Minnesota, the Detroit News poll put Biden ahead of Sanders by nearly 7 percentage points in Michigan. And of course, that was before the big Mo. Elizabeth Warren, I guess Liz is engaged in her own trail of tears now. She has dropped out of the 2020 presidential race. She has not yet announced who she will be endorsing. And I'm sure everyone is waiting with bated breath to see who Liz endorses. The New York Times, who of course had endorsed Elizabeth Warren, it's not that simple because nothing is that simple these days. That they endorsed Elizabeth Warren and Senator Amy Klobuchar for some reason. I guess they were just both so good that they couldn't make up their minds. And there's a lot of agonizing from the New York Times about how there are no women left in the race. It's always the year of women in American politics until it isn't. Let's see what the Times has to say. Senator Elizabeth Warren entered the 2020 race with expansive plans to use the federal government to remake American society, pressing to strip power and wealth from a moneyed class that she saw as fundamentally corrupting the country's economic and political order. She exited on Thursday after her avalanche of progressive policy proposals, which briefly elevated her to frontrunner status last fall, failed to attract a broader political coalition. Her departure means that a Democratic field that began as the most diverse in American history and included 6 women is now essentially down to two white men and Tulsi Gabbard, but we're not going to talk about her because she's an unperson. Let's see. And those two white men are Joseph R. Biden Jr. I just love the nomenclature of the New York Times. Everyone is Mr. And when was the last time that Joe Biden was referred to as Joseph R. Biden Jr.? But no, I guess they're just going to keep this up. Warren said from the start she'd been told there were only two true lanes in the 2020 contest, a liberal one dominated by Sanders, 78, and a moderate one led by Biden, 77. I thought that wasn't right, Warren said in front of her house in Cambridge as she suspended her campaign. Why do they say suspended? Why not just ended or concluded? Suspended suggests that it might start again at some point. Though her vision energized many liberals, the unlikely chant of big structural change rang out at her rallies. Yeah, sure it did. It did not find a wide enough audience among the party's working class and diverse base. Are there any working class people left in the Democratic Party? They're certainly diverse. I shouldn't think there's very many working class supporters. Working class Democrats have been hemorrhaging since, since Richard Nixon. And this became a fatal blood loss during Ronald Reagan's years. I need some space around this, she said. Wow, these progressive women love this word space. I don't know, which word do they love the most, space or systemic? Warren's impact on the race was far greater than just the outcome for her own candidacy. Her policy plans drove the agenda. Again, from what I've seen of the debates, this is simply not true. The agenda, how much do you love trannies? How about male to female transsexuals in American prisons? What should they get? Should they get all of the female hygiene stuff that women get, real women get? Well, of course they should, And I believe Kamala Harris, long gone, was talking about how she would read the names of murdered Black transsexual women every week. And I think Liz Warren said that she was going to consult with an 8-year-old girl to vet her choice for the cabinet minister in charge of health and human services, something like that. Yes, she effectively pushed Mike Bloomberg out of the race. Well, this is what Twitter is saying, that you're ungrateful, you people, because you do not appreciate the fine work done by Liz Warren in pushing Mini Mike out of the race. Well, it wasn't much of a push that was needed. So let's see. What else do we got here? Oh, yeah, so let's have a wrap-up here of other political news. Mitt Romney, das ewige Mormon, could derail Republican subpoena targeting the Bidens. The Utah Republican is concerned the push appears intended to undermine a Trump rival, says Politico. Yeah, I suppose you could say that. You could also say that the only reason that Joe Biden is even in this race is because the Democrats needed an excuse to impeach Trump. And it turns out that after the failure of the Mueller report, the damp squib that was the Mueller report, that Russiagate, so-called, wasn't going to cut it. A Republican effort to subpoena records about Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden could be derailed amid concerns from at least one GOP senator that the push appears politically motivated, and of course that nothing that goes on in the halls of Congress is ever politically motivated, because, why would politics be allowed to interfere in governance, which, is all about public service? Let us not forget. The Senate Homeland Security Committee is set to vote next Wednesday on a subpoena for records from a Democratic public relations firm related to the panel's investigation of conflict of interest allegations against the Bidens. But Senator Romney, a member of the panel, has hinted that he could vote against issuing the subpoena, noting the committee's investigation might look political. There's no question the appearance is not good, Romney said. He said he's still considering his vote. Republicans hold a 8-6 majority in the committee, so if he votes with the Democrats, it's a 7-7 tie, and there will be no subpoena. Why doesn't Romney simply join the Democratic Party or change his party registration to Vengeance? Yes, I ran for president in 2012 and lost, despite all the experts telling me that I was winning. And hey, I was ahead of the curve there on Russia being, the greatest threat to humanity. And then this guy, Donald Trump, he becomes president in 2016. And Mitt felt so strongly about it that he translated from Massachusetts, where he had been governor. And of course, he was born and raised in Michigan, where his father had been governor. He translated to the Muslim home world of Utah, where he was elected to the Senate. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, the committee's chairman, declined to comment on Romney's views, but said he sees no reason why anyone would object to the subpoena, which seeks documents from Blue Star, a Democratic PR firm, about Hunter Biden's role on the board of Ukrainian energy company Burisma. Peters has raised concern, that's Senator Peters of Michigan, about the veracity of the information the committee receives, in particular whether it's part of a Russia disinformation campaign. Well, that's richly amusing, considering that Donald Trump was impeached based on a Ukrainian disinformation campaign. Several Republicans, including Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr and Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham, have expressed similar worries, both in private and public. Quite frankly, the Homeland Security Committee should be focusing on issues related to Homeland Security. You notice that when you buy a DVD or Blu-ray, for those people who still buy them, you will get a notice saying that the Department of Homeland Security is involved in the problem of pirating the DVDs and Blu-rays. Now, how on earth this could be considered to be an issue of national security? Well, I guess, it might affect Disney stock, so I guess I'm sorry, I must apologize. That is a very serious issue of national security. Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky affair was to manage my anxieties. Why is he still talking about this? Perhaps because Monica Lewinsky is still talking about this. I felt sorry for the young woman when this all blew up in her face back in the 90s. And I remember reading someone saying that, this woman would make some dentist a very happy man. And I rather thought the same. But Monica Lewinsky has she has a master's degree or a PhD in Monica Lewinsky studies now. She has decided to make this her career. So embarrassing incidents, people's memories fade over time, but they're never going to fade with regard to Monica Lewinsky, because apparently that's the only thing she has in her arsenal. That's the only thing, apparently, that anyone would be interested in her for, is that the President of the United States once ejaculated on her dress. How very sad. Likening life in the White House, the New York Post reports, to being a boxer, staggering after a 30-round fight. What kind of boxing is Bill Clinton talking about? Heavyweight championship fights used to be 15 rounds, and then they moved them down to 12. But in any event, Clinton 73 says in the Hulu series Hillary that his affair was something that will take your mind off it for a while. Yes, I suppose that is a common experience that people have with sex, that it tends to take one's mind off whatever else is going on in the world. Everyone's life has pressures and disappointments, terrors, fears of whatever, he said, in justifying seeking distractions to manage my anxieties for years. Nobody thinks they're taking a risk, he says in the 4-hour doc set to stream on Hulu starting Friday. That's not why we do stupid things. Come on. Bill Clinton is many things, but he is not an idiot. And obviously, having sex with an intern in the Oval Office was taking an enormous risk. This reminds me, he's talking about boxing. I don't know whether I've mentioned this on the stream. I certainly will be mentioning it. That if you see anyone who's listed as a Rhodes Scholar, then you know pretty much all you need to know about that person. The Rhodes Scholarship was devised by Cecil Rhodes, the great British imperialist, but now it's a kind of a deep state initiation that people who will be useful to the deep state, like Pete Buttigieg, another example, are talent spotted at an early age. And they are sent to Oxford University in order to burnish their academic credentials. But there is a physical component, a sports component to the Rhodes Scholarship. And I've always wondered, what was Bill Clinton's sport exactly? Is sweating while sitting down, is that considered a sport now? Clinton insists in the doc, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January, that he is now a totally different person than the cheater 20 years ago. The affair with then intern Lewinsky led to Clinton's impeachment in 1998 before he was acquitted by the Senate. He admitted they initially lied to wife Hillary and denied the affair, recalling how he finally had to sit her down and confess when it was too obvious that he was lying. I went and sat on the bed and talked to her. I told her exactly what happened. When it happened, I said I still feel terrible about it. We've been through quite a bit in the last few years. I said I have no defense. It's inexcusable what I did. Yes, except that if you recall, in 1992, Bill and Hillary appeared on 60 Minutes in one of the most excruciating pieces of television that I've ever seen, where infidelity was brought up, and oh God, why are you talking about this? You're with your wife and you're both talking about this. But then we learned that Hillary was in charge of dealing with so-called bimbo eruptions. Yes, these women who had gotten entangled sexually with Bill Clinton, they were demonized as bimbos, and Hillary led the pack in seeking to destroy their reputations. Hillary admits that she was devastated. I could not believe it. Yeah, you could believe it. You were just, you were waiting. You thought, like, how, who's Bill carrying on with? I just hope it's not in the Oval. Yeah, of course it's in the Oval Office. Of course, Bill could not resist the opportunity to have sex in the Oval Office. I was just so personally just so hurt, and I can't believe this. I can't believe you lied. Elizabeth Wurtzel, who died about a month ago, said in her book Bitch that the salient fact about Bill Clinton is not just that he is full of shit, but that being full of shit is the most important thing about him. Bill called the sessions one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but it was necessary. She deserved it. Chelsea deserved it. Yeah, drag your daughter into it. Why not? And I needed it. I feel terrible about the fact that Monica Lewinsky's life was defined by it, unfairly, I think. Well, as I mentioned just now, Monica Lewinsky seems to have grasped that nettle. So what's going on in the chat? Okay, there seems to be an awful lot of chat. I wonder how much of it actually has to do with the show. James Fountain says, where I live, cases of coronavirus are arising from people who've not traveled or been in close contact with travelers. It's spreading locally. But he says, Kevin finally heated Jordan Peterson and cleaned his room. Well, I was wondering when someone would notice that. It's not exactly shifting deck chairs on the Titanic. It's just that I have no place to put the Blu-rays and DVDs. I just keep moving them around. I have actually made some space, and things are going to get better in that regard. I can promise you that. Matt Young says, "Is this the Luke Ford diaspora?" That's a clever comment. Okay. Kevin is wearing a South Park tie. He has faith, Father O'Shea, and the sisters won't catch him. Oh, right. Some question about Persians. Oh, okay. I don't want to go into that. Oh, all right. Let's see if we've got some pertinent comments here. Okay, there's a lot of talk about Persia. Yes. How did coronavirus become such a thing in Iran? How close are the connections between the Chinese and the Iranians? I know they're in an alliance. Philip Daniel says Warren's support came overwhelmingly from librarians, sociologists, psychologists, and secretaries. Seems reasonable enough, but there's not all that many of those people when you put them all together, but I understand the type. Someone said Warren is the type of white lady who makes her kids celebrate Kwanzaa, and that is right on the nose. No question about it. Kind of tired of hearing how hot Tulsi supposedly is. She's hot for a politician, that's all. Actually, Tulsi is a very good-looking woman indeed. Her skin isn't good, but the rest of her is outstanding. Matt Young says, I miss drunk Kevin. Well, St. Patrick's Day is coming up in 12 days. I will break my fast for that. I can't promise anything, you understand. Okay, there's talk about Michelle Malkin. I like Michelle Malkin. Guys like act like Tulsi is Cindy Crawford circa 1991. It's ridiculous. Cindy Crawford, I never found her very attractive. Dead behind the eyes, I would have to say. Is that a chair behind Kevin's chair? Yes, it is, but it's much wider than the office chair that I'm sitting in. I use the chair behind me to read or to watch movies. Oh dear, this Ricky Bullock fellow is really taking against the Tulsi stands. Between the pockmarks and the annoying vocal tone, you're not a man. I just don't get it. She's quite fit, and I suppose this is attractive to men these days, especially since so many women, since the norm is, well, the opposite of fit. Philip Daniel says race is a social construct, but if you look white, the woke left will treat you as such. Cognitive dissonance alert. Well, yes, that's what the progressives are all about. Cognitive dissonance. Race doesn't exist, but racism is the most serious problem on the planet. Another example would be that Trump is an idiot, and yet he is a sinister mastermind at the same time. So let's talk about American gerontocracy. I was when I spoke about the book The Scramble for Europe a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about it on Otto's one of Otto's streams as well. There is a great deal of anger in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that their countries are run by a gerontocracy. Of course, America is run by a gerontocracy as well. This piece in The Atlantic by Derek Thompson called "Why Do Such Elderly People Run America?" Sanders is too old, so is Biden, Trump too. Derek Thompson is very much not old. Let's see, he's a staff writer at The Atlantic, where he writes about economics, technology, and the media. He's the author of Hitmakers and the host of the podcast Crazy/Genius. And he is so not old that apparently he disdains the use of a comb. He writes, when Joe Biden climbed to the stage in California to celebrate his Super Tuesday comeback in the Democratic primary, three things happened in a matter of minutes. He basked in the thunderous applause from the crowd. He mistook his wife for his sister, And he delivered the sort of confusing, intermittently slurry, and occasionally indecipherable oration that has defined so many of his recent public appearances. One might expect a typical opponent to seize on these verbal slips by questioning whether Biden, who is 77, is too old to hack it. But his rival Bernie Sanders, who has already suffered a heart attack during the campaign, is a year older. In January 2021, the three people most likely to be the next president, Biden, Sanders, and Donald Trump, would each be the oldest president to ever give an inaugural address in American history. And let's see we'll get some pop cult references here. We have now before us three candidates divided by ideology, but united in dotage. Do people normally accuse Donald Trump of being a dotard? I don't think so. He seems pretty sharp to me. All three white men, boo, were born in the 1940s before the invention of Velcro and the independence of India and Israel. Amazingly, each is currently older than any of the past U.S. presidents. Well, Reagan was older than Nixon. It seemed unlikely, but it was true. If through some constitutional glitch, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, or Barack Obama jumped into the 2020 race at this very moment, each would suddenly become the youngest man in the contest. How did this happen? One possibility is that it's mere randomness. It's only one election that's been roiled by Trump, you might think, and younger blood is waiting in the wings. But old age runs deep in modern presidential politics. Elizabeth Warren would also be the oldest president-elect in American history. The losers of the past two presidential elections, Mitt Romney and Hillary Clinton, were born months apart in 1947. And then he talks about demand and supply. There are reasons why today's voters might prefer older candidates, and that reason is that Americans are growing older. Now, maybe it's about decades of youth disengagement from politics. According to The Economist, older Americans have outvoted younger Americans by a wider margin than in any typical OECD country. This is particularly true at the local level. As Timothy Noah writes in Political, studies have found that the median voter age in America's municipal elections is 57, nearly a generation older than the median age of eligible voters. I'm reminded of the professor on Futurama watching TV, the election for president of Earth. He seemed to be very interested in this, and Leela asked him, "When did you get so interested in politics, professor?" And he said, "The minute I became old." Old people have more to lose than young people. They typically are propertied, much more so than younger people. And of course, they have pensions, private and public, that they're very jealous of, and they don't want anyone messing with. Audiences tend to gravitate toward extreme novelty when it's paired with deep familiarity. Most people want to feel mildly surprised and simultaneously comforted by their media, whether film, television, or music. That has not been my experience of observing audiences in the last generation. They do not want surprises at all. Robert Zemeckis famously defended giving away the endings in the trailers of his film, saying that Americans like their films to be like McDonald's. That is to say, they know exactly what they are going to get before they enter the restaurant. American leadership is old folks all the way down. The U.S. government is a creaky vintage machine whose most crucial cogs could be generously described as vintage. The average age in Congress is near an all-time high. The House Speaker, House Majority Leader, House Majority Whip, and Senate Majority Leader are all over 75. I don't know. I would say that there's a particular problem with the Democratic Party, and the reason for that is that they know that the next generation or the succeeding generations hate their guts. And so Nancy Pelosi et al., Chuck Schumer and the like, they are going to stick around forever because they are not going to be missed when they are gone. Also, of course, the longer they stay in Congress, the more the opportunities to become coincidentally rich, like Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is my favorite example of this, who flies a Gulfstream, her own private Gulfstream, from her home in San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and back. This phenomenon is bigger than politics. Across business, science, and finance, power is concentrated among the elderly. In the past 40 years, the average age of Nobel Prize laureates has increased in almost every discipline. I'm just going to, including physics, chemistry, medicine, and literature. I'm going to jump in to say that as Ed Dutton and Bruce Charlton pointed out, there's a good reason for this, which is that people have become stupider in recent generations, and the very idea of genius, which the Nobel Prize is supposed to recognize, is deprecated these days. Every women coders, however many there are, they're all rock stars. They're all geniuses. Anyone can be a genius. It's just a question of application. As far as literature goes, well, poetry is dead. The short story is dead. The novel is dying. And so who are the serious young writers that the Nobel Committee would seek to honor? Among S&P 500 companies, the average age of incoming CEOs has increased by 14 years in the past 14 years. Americans 55 and older account for less than 1/3 of the population, but they own 2/3 of the nation's wealth, the highest level of wealth concentrated on record. Well, again, the boomers aren't going anywhere. They're going to have to be pulled, dragging and screaming, for the reason that they know that they are not well liked by succeeding generations, particularly as they have created an economic system which is pretty much them pulling up the drawbridge after them. We've made our pile. The reason that you do not have what we have is because you're lazy and feckless. And I put myself through university working. There were good jobs? There were good jobs for people back then? And how much was your university tuition, by the way? When I started at the University of British Columbia in 1973, a full year's tuition was $400. I'm not making this up. The expense of presidential politics also disproportionately benefits the old. Well, yeah, that's true. But John Kerry, who married the Heinz widow, he wasn't all that old when he ran for president. Young people inherit money. That's why there are so many Kennedys in politics. And I see that one of the Kennedy Spragues is challenging Senator Markey in Massachusetts to quarrel with 1,000 Hallmark copywriters. Age is not just a number, and rule by the old is not harmless. Well, I think we have to make a distinction here. Yes, it's true. Age is not just a number. That is certainly true. To be ruled by the old because they are grasping and selfish is one thing. To be ruled by the old because they have greater wisdom and experience is another thing. The author argues gerontocracy is a cousin to plutocracy. Power concentrated in the hands of old people who are also rich will predictably lead to policies that benefit the old and the rich at the expense of the less privileged. The federal government already guarantees universal health insurance and a universal basic income to seniors, even as Republicans cry socialism when young people request versions of the same policies. It's unlikely that young people will notch many policy wins in a government whose median age is over 70. Well, this is a half-truth. There is a high-low coalition in America, which is represented by the Democratic Party, which we see in the apotheosis of senile Joe Biden. He is committed to, greater Gibbs. He is also committed to neoliberalism and globalism, the hollowing out of the middle class. So, it's very good for the 1%, and it's very good for the people dependent upon government benefits, not so good for the middle class. Certainly not. So let's have, I talked about Canada briefly, but I want to talk about it a little more. Not so much about, the conditions, but just the way that our elite thinks. Now, during the last election cycle, 2016, every Canadian pundit, and I don't think there was an exception. Well, I would be an exception, but I don't think I have a pundit membership card. Said that Trump was going to lose. Not only was Trump going to lose, this was going to be a drubbing, similar to that of Roosevelt in 1936, triumphing over Alf Landon, or LBJ curb stomping Barry Goldwater in 1964, or Nixon over McGovern, or Reagan over Mondale. It was going to be, historic. Now, after Trump won with the highest amount of electoral college votes since George H.W. Bush, there weren't any retirements among the Canadian pundit class, because you never get punished for being outrageously wrong. And now they're all very excited about Joe Biden. The fact is that Canadians know about the United States. I mean, you can't not know about the United States living in Canada. But most of what Canadians know about American politics is, well, it's not much. It is quite shallow. That Canadians tend to look at American politics as rather an inferior version or a sillier version of our own politics, which is one of the reasons why they make so many gross errors. They do not treat American politics with respect. Now, there's a piece in Policy, which is the journal of Canadian politics and public policy, which sounds pretty serious. She's Lisa Van Dusen is a columnist for the Hill Times. She was Washington bureau chief for Sun Media, international writer for Peter Jennings at ABC News. Jennings, of course, was another Canadian, and an editor at AP in New York and UPI in Washington. She is also clearly related to me, perhaps by marriage. The Van Dusens were once a very big factor in Canadian politics. They come from my father's side of the family, at the level of my grandmother. And there's a Van Dusen on CPAC. There's a Van Dusen on the CBC, and then there's this woman. She wrote this incredible essay, which is it's just dire in every respect. And I'm going to quote from some of it to give you an idea of the shallowness of Canadian discourse with regard to the United States. When James Clyburn, the elder statesman of South Carolina Democratic politics and African-American political icon, took the stage Saturday night in Columbia to celebrate Joe Biden's remarkable win in the state, he didn't quote Yogi Berra. Why is she dragging Yogi Berra into this? Yogi Berra said a number of famous malapropisms, but I don't know. Maybe she was looking for an excuse to drag Yogi Berra. You see a lot of references to Yogi Berra in published essays. A student and teacher of history, Clyburn plucked from time, in other words, quoted, the words of America's most famous tourist. If Americans ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great, Clyburn said, quoting Alexis de Tocqueville. We have as our candidate a real good man. Clyburn didn't just deliver South Carolina for the former vice president. He acted as an authoritative messenger who cut through the fog of tactical malarkey. Oh, dear God. To coin a euphemism, that's not a euphemism, that had gathered around Biden's candidacy. Then he started kicking ass in the campaign brain trust. Mixed metaphors. She loves them. He started kicking ass in the campaign brain trust publicly. The result was a 48-hour revival worthy of a Sunday morning AME church service. Donald Trump has spent the past 3 years filling the public sphere with content, that made America seem divided, cynical, corrupt, and crazy, turning the office from a bully pulpit into, wait for it, a bullying bullhorn. Don't people have editors anymore? See, bully pulpit apparently is good, but bully is not good. The bully pulpit is redolent of the demagogue, all right? But apparently that's good, but a bullying bullhorn. What followed Biden's South Carolina victory was a cascade of countervailing content, again, the suicidal search for alliteration, that reminded Americans and the world of the real country beneath the performative chaos. Oh, so Trump isn't a real president? He didn't win legitimately in 2016? On Saturday, the voters of the state, Clyburn and Biden, reclaimed the moral high ground, the Mojigro, not from Trump, obviously, but from right where Barack Obama left it in 2017. Remember when Barack Obama was president? That guy, he did so many great things, like, you know, that thing that he did, you know, that everyone liked. Yeah, it'll come to me in a minute. But yeah, ooh, Barack Obama. In the 2 days that followed, from the Sunday shows to Monday's endorsements by Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke, and Harry Reid and Susan Rice, the Democrats' exuberant coalescence around Biden felt like a SEAL Team 6 rescue. Oh, just stop! Of a national narrative hijacked by an unhinged villain. On Wednesday, former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg added his own endorsement. Biden's message isn't just experience and competence. What competence? When has he ever displayed competence? It's a restoration of sanity, calm, and normalcy. His opponents have painted that restoration as nostalgia, the promise of a return to a pre-Trumpian utopia that never existed. They cast his invocations of Obama as pitching the past, as though the values, worldview, and tone of those 8 years existed in a time capsule impossible to excavate. The values, worldview, and tone, hope, and change. Yeah, that's pretty definitive there. I'll just remind listeners again, Barack Obama was elected in 2008, and he had a mandate to clean out Wall Street. The country would have been behind him, and the Congress wouldn't have dared stand in his way. But instead, he showered the crooks with public money. And he got his reward when he left office. Him and his wife both got their rewards. But I guess that's what, what do they call it? Doing well by doing good. As though truth, competence, pluralism, multilateralism, compassion, empathy, civility, democratic norms, and leadership have somehow seen their sell-by date, and the world is now hopelessly relegated to the plotting of reality show masterminds behind Trump, Brexit, and other democracy-discrediting extravaganzas. Oh, how does that discredit democracy? This was a referendum. This was direct democracy, in or out, yes or no. Instead of, the people not being asked and the government doing it, or politicians, as they typically do, promise to do something and then say, well, no, we can't do that because, conditions have changed. No, this was direct democracy. You can't get any more democratic than that. On Tuesday, millions of voters begged to differ. It was as though Biden was waiting for South Carolina. Everyone else was too. And the results, amplified by the momentum of endorsements, unleashed that suspense in the form of a comeback wave. Oh my God, the mixed metaphors. Unprecedented in modern politics. The black voters of South Carolina, whose primary discernment always combines instinct and pragmatism, handed Biden the electability certificate that the party and supporters were waiting for. Ryan Landry, I quoted a piece from him in the American Sun a few days ago. This is the John Kerry mistake. I'm electable because I'm winning all of these states because of heavy support from black voters that my party does not have a hope in hell of winning in November. Bernie Sanders has been presenting an alternative to Trump that hands voters the conundrum of being both socioeconomically compelling to people tired of having their futures tethered to intractability and unimplementable in the face of that intractability, even within the party he has adopted. At a time when the voices, rights, and needs of human beings, aka people, have been subjugated to technology, to profits, to corruption, and to industrialized nonsense, what on earth does that mean? This isn't so much an argument between socialism and progressivism, or between one form of healthcare reform and another. In policy terms, it's a choice between the lure of the impossible, especially given the looming context of a coronavirus recession, and the art of the possible. On character, Biden's best reference, beyond his long-standing reputation as a fundamentally decent, authentic person, says who? Says who? He is transparently phony. This is a man who went to Washington in 1973 and never left. That's 2 years before Chuck Schumer went to Washington for the first time. Oh, Joe Biden, he says folks. He knows how to make elaborate black people handshakes. So he must be a decent, authentic person. And that he has been the mobbish president's most forensically target political nemesis. We're into word salad territory here, and also an addiction to a thesaurus, the object of an obsession sufficiently unshakable to have been worth getting impeached over. That fixation has had the unintended consequence of elevating Biden to the status of avatar for Americans. Oh, piss off, you silly woman. The walking receptacle of a personalized, concentrated, micro-targeted cocktail of the same malevolence, vindictiveness, and corruption that has bedeviled the entire country every day of the past 3 years. For a candidate whose core appeal has always been relatability, that status holds a whole new layer of it that speaks for itself. This race, it turns out, isn't about ideology, it's about values. Brace yourself for a parallel campaign to make it anything but. Yeah, how about, policies? How about, see, this is why Trump, one of the reasons why Trump infuriates so many people, is that it's all very well, to talk about the middle class and how they're suffering, but you're supposed to bring in policies which exclusively benefit the high-low alliance. You're not supposed to benefit the middle class or the working class. No. Those people are, they're ignorant. They don't understand the finer points. They don't have enough money to be important. And, they're not angry enough to be important. That's what it comes down to. Of course, the Tea Party was a genuine expression of American dissatisfaction. You could call it, with reference to the French politician of the 1950s, Pierre Puget. You could call it a revolt of the shopkeepers, but it was suborned by the Republican Party. Oh yeah, we're the experts and we're going to take over, and guess what? Nothing is going to change. Briefly, I'll just mention a piece that appeared in the Globe and Mail by Natalie Pon, described as a CPA and a political activist based in Edmonton. Once again, the future of the Conservative Party of Canada is in the hands of its membership. And once again, I find myself needing to make a desperate plea to my fellow party members. As was the case in 2017, the Tories will vote in a leadership contest in which some of the more bigoted tenets of social conservatism are part of the discourse. I've been involved in partisan conservative politics off and on since 2013. In 2016, I successfully advocated to remove the traditional definition of marriage from our policy declaration. Well, good for you, sweetie. I do not think I would have to debate the topic in 2016. I did not think it would be an issue in 2020. I believe individuals like Richard Deckary, who declared his candidacy for the leadership and stated that being gay is a choice, represent a very small minority within the party. I am relieved that party headquarters ultimately barred him from running when the window for applications closed last week. However, I'm left to wonder why people like him feel at home in my party. And it's forced me again to wonder whether, despite the constant platitudes around renewal, energizing young voters, and incorporating more color into the face of conservatism in Canada, the party might be more concerned about maintaining its aging base than losing a conservative, university educated millennial professional, invisible minority like me. Wow, she is the whole package. To enact real change, we need a leader with a clear vision for this country and for the future of conservatism. I consider myself a small C conservative in ideology, but I often struggle to explain to my peers why I'm a big C conservative when the Tories project themselves as little more than the party of boutique tax credits and blanket opposition to the carbon tax. We need a leader who is focused on building strong communities and families, but doesn't care what your family looks like. In our future leader, we should expect so much more than a declaration of support for same-sex marriage or empty chest thumping about how blue you are. Let's define conservatism, what it's for, and not let it be what we are against. This is the terminus of the conservative movement, that we're not bad, we're not evil, we don't believe in tradition. No, tradition has been, superseded. It's superannuated. I'm a conservative. What does that mean? Well, what it means in Canada is that I want the Conservative Party to be just like the Liberal Party, only different. How different? We're a big tent. Okay, does that big tent include people who are against abortion? No, that would be social conservatism. Well, what's your big tent mean then? Does it mean a debate about whether a certain tax rate should be set at 28 or 30%? That's pretty much what it comes down to. And if thank God for Trump, who rescued the Republican Party from this nonsense, because once again, if you want to see the end result of all manner of American trends, look to Canada. And you end up with some professional young person. This woman wrote a practically identical piece in Maclean's magazine 3 years ago. I'm a young person. I'm a millennial. I'm a visible minority. Well, once again, good for you, sweetie. I mean, who gives a toss? Let's talk about Woody Allen now. I should say right off the top, I'm not a fan. Woody Allen made fun of this in one of his films. I think it was Stardust Memories, in which aliens land, and they're talking about him, and we liked his earlier movies. Well, yes, I liked his earlier movies. He has made so many movies, and almost without exception, the movies that he's made in the last 30 years, well, maybe 40 years, I have found dreary to a fault. His obsession with oral sex and his male characters, wanting it, not getting it. His tiresome belief that if he makes his movies dull enough, he will be compared to Ingmar Bergman. Now, as far as his personal life, obviously marrying Mia Farrow's adopted daughter was a bad thing to do. He was never married to Maria Farrow. That doesn't change the fact that it's effectively incest. Of course, getting involved with Mia Farrow in the first place, especially considering the history of sexual abuse in that family, which you can look up. That's a strange decision. And Mia Farrow, yes, I'm going to adopt, 10 kids from all over the world, because, that's the sort of thing a normal person does. I don't know, how was it? Was it 10, 12, 15? Something like that. collect them all. She was, way ahead of Angelina Jolie and Madonna on that. As to whether Woody Allen sexually molested one of his daughters, we are never going to know the truth about that. Clearly, Allen has been found not guilty by various authorities that have investigated in this. The daughter maintains otherwise. Her mother maintains otherwise. But it is clear that the daughter's mind has been poisoned by her mother. And the only two people, I would say that the only person who actually knows the truth about what happened is Woody Allen. But a couple of days ago, there was a surprising announcement that Woody Allen has written a autobiography or memoir, and it's ready to go. It's not only finished, it's been accepted. Apparently, I saw a mock-up cover, and but this is causing a big problem with employees of his publisher. According to the New York Post, staff at Ronan Farrow's publisher staged a walkout Thursday in protest of their parent company's plans to publish Woody Allen's new memoir. The workers at Little Brown and Company voiced their anger to officials at Hachette Book Group after Farrow blasted them for releasing his estranged father's forthcoming memoir apropos of nothing. The employees headed to the company's human resources office on 6th Avenue in Midtown to complain. Hachette's CEO, Michael Peach, tried to hold a town hall but was rebuffed. None of the senior leadership would stand with him, and the staff walked out of the office, the source said. The staff felt so strongly about this and wanted to do this for Ronan, his sister Dylan, and all survivors of sexual assault. I'm reminded that Woody Allen named one of his children Satchel after the Great Negro League pitcher Satchel Paige. Only a terrible person would disfigure a child with a name like Satchel. In any event, on Monday, Farrow criticized the publisher of his blockbuster book, Catch and Kill, claiming the company went behind his back to strike a deal with Allen, who he and other members of his family accused of sexually abusing his sister Dylan. Went behind his back. Who made Ronan Farrow the king of publishing? Here's a story about Ronan Farrow that I have on excellent authority, first-hand source. Ronan is apparently a very clever fellow, and he began university at a very young age. And so a friend of mine found himself in a philosophy class with Ronan Farrow at a time when Ronan Farrow was 14 years old. And Ronan Farrow was expanding authoritatively on some point, and my friend became exasperated and blurted out, "What do you know about anything? You're only 14. Later, he told me he felt bad about it afterwards, but I think his point is taken. Farrow's book, which recounts how he helped spark the Me Too movement by doing exposés on the sexual misdeeds of powerful men such as Harvey Weinstein, was published by Little Brown. Later Thursday, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist retweeted comments from workers and fellow authors in support of his complaints about the publishing of Allen's book by another arm of Hachette, and how the editors did not get Dylan's side of the story. As authors who have a book coming out with a Hachette imprint in May, so-and-so and I want to add our voices to those standing with survivors of sexual abuse, tweeted Robin Stevenson. Dylan Farrow also went to Twitter. Unbelievably overwhelmed and so incredibly grateful for the solidarity demonstrated by Hachette USA and Little Brown employees from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Okay, books like this are not fact-checked. Okay, this is a memoir. This is Woody Allen's life in his own words. Books like this are vetted for libel. When someone publishes a book about themselves, you don't go to that person's enemies and say, "Oh, do you object to this?" "Well, of course I object to this. I think he's got the wrong end of the stick." "Oh, okay, well, we'll just cross that all out. I think we're just going to scrub the book," because apparently this book is going to annoy a lot of people. Again, the 14-year-old Ronan Farrow, it gives you an idea at Fordham University. It gives you an idea of the type of man that he is. Apparently, he's the king of Me Too, the king of publishing, that no book in America or perhaps the world may be printed without his imprimatur. After the protest, book agent Lynn Nesbitt, who brokered the rights for Catch and Kill, told the Post, Hachette has also dealt a huge blow to the Little Brown team who have worked tirelessly to make Catch and Kill a success. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that a memoir by Woody Allen is likely to be a bestseller. He still has a lot of fans, and of course, there's all these people who hate him. That is a good combination. I don't know that I'll be. I don't know that I will be reading it, but let's see. I think I alluded to this last week. This story. There are certain stories that one reads that seem so incredible, fatuous, or just plain stupid that sometime after I've read them, I think, no, I couldn't have read that. I must have imagined that. I must have had a dream, a nightmare about this, because, no serious news organization is going to print such a story. Well, here we go. This is a story from Agence France Presse. Third-hand smoke poses health risks, say U.S. scientists. The stale odor that announces a smoker's entry into a room may be more than merely unpleasant. A new study by scientists at Yale University has found that compounds from tobacco smoke can infiltrate well-ventilated rooms by hitching a ride on people's clothes, skin, and hair, and then evaporating slowly over time in a process called off-gassing. By placing a high-tech air sampling device in the exhaust duct of a non-smoking movie theater in Germany, the researchers determined that so-called third-hand smoke exposed moviegoers to between 1 and 10 cigarettes of passive smoke, depending on the substance in question. Their paper was published in Science Advances on Wednesday. Secondhand smoke has been studied for decades and heightens people's risks for heart conditions and lung cancer, although the exact level of risk has been contested in recent studies. It's been contested from the very beginning. The risk factor that the infamous EPA study came up with was 19%, or 1.19, which is statistical static compared to actually smoking, which is a risk factor of 10. And of course, the EPA study was eventually thrown out in court around that same time. The most extensive survey at the time of secondhand smoking by the World Health Organization was suppressed. By who? Because it came to the conclusion that secondhand smoking did not constitute a discernible or significant risk. But now we have third-hand smoke. So apparently between 1 and 10 cigarettes of passive smoke, I don't even know what that means. But apparently we're talking about an emanation of an emanation, or a phantom of a phantom. There's also been increasing interest into third-hand smoke, but most studies have so far looked at rooms that were recently smoked in, rather than how people who were either smokers or had been around smokers impacted non-smoking indoor environments. The Yale team examined a cinema in Mainz, Germany, that has had a smoking ban for 15 years, long enough for any pre-ban contaminants to clear out. For the course of 4 days, they found the levels of 35 tobacco-related chemicals surged when audience members entered the theater. These included cancer-causing compounds like benzene and formaldehyde. Now, come on, here's the next paragraph here. And they're trolling us, right? I'm going to read it to you because they're trolling us. The effects were particularly pronounced during R-rated films like Resident Evil, which the author suggested was because such movies attract older audiences more likely to have been exposed to smoke. Our work establishes that there's a substantial transport of third-hand smoke contaminants from people into a real-world non-smoking indoor environment. He conceded that the precise level of health risks to others was beyond the scope of the current study and would depend on a variety of factors, including how often people were exposed to the chemicals and their proximity to the source of emissions. Based on these results, it's our hope that the work will generate much needed discussion about third-hand smoke and that the research and policy will continue to evolve from those discussions. Well, clearly, this is the first volley of a campaign to ban smoking entirely. That apparently there's no acceptable level of cigarette smoke or residue from cigarette smoke. Now, when you hear this phrase, no acceptable level, if you look into it, it would appear there's no acceptable level of anything. We see scientific studies that claim, despite there are studies that talk about benefits of drinking alcohol, particularly, say, red wine. Other studies say there is no acceptable level of alcohol. Well, on that basis, then there's no acceptable level of smoke of any kind. You know that, the frying food has a risk factor somewhere between 4 and 5, as opposed to the 1.19 of secondhand smoke. That inhaling fat, oil, which has been vaporized, actually is a serious health concern. How about cars? They emit toxins, pollution. Is there an acceptable level? No. Science have said there's no acceptable level of anything. And this is all preposterous. It's based on the planted axiom that if certain measures were taken to remove pollutants from the atmosphere and elsewhere, then people would live forever. But I guess we're going to be hearing a lot more about third-hand smoke. So International Women's Day, which I'll point out is a communist holiday, is going to be celebrated in 3 days' time. A story from the Daily Mail. Leicester University Students' Union faces backlash after insulting rebranding of International Women's Day to include trans women. Leicester University Student Union has renamed its celebration as International Wimxen's Day in reference to what it called a more inclusive spelling of women. Once again, this is the kind of story where I would think, nah, I never really read that because this is just too stupid. Now, there was a time, going back to the 1960s, when radical feminists would spell women with a Y because they didn't like the idea that that women were spun off from men. I mean, one could argue the reverse, that since, women is bigger than men, that women, incorporates men, that it's actually that men are in the inferior position, but never mind. The use of Y in the spelling of women was abandoned, I suspect largely because it was so relentlessly mocked. But now we have Latin X, and now we have Womxen's Day. I don't even know how that's supposed to be pronounced. However, the name change has been branded insulting by some who claimed it was a disservice to suffragettes who fought for female equality during the 20th century. It comes after the student body elected trans woman Dan Orr, Dan spelled D-A-N, to the position of women's officer, a role that requires her to speak out on issues such as sexism. One student said her appointment left her very upset, but she felt unable to speak out publicly through fear of reprisals from the university. Yes, and I think those fears are very real. She told The Times, "I'm sure Dan Orr will try her best, but she has not grown up with the same prejudices that face girls and women and the stereotypes they have had to deal with that are related to the female body. I know she will have had her own prejudice to deal with, but they are not the same." So in her election manifesto, Ms. Orr said feminism is nothing without women of color, migrant, disabled, queer, trans, black, and sex working women. Yeah, gotta have the prosies in there. As a trans woman, I've been lucky to work with and be supported by some deeply compassionate women activists, and I want to extend the same support to women who are often excluded from certain types of feminism. In addition to a women's officer, the student union also has an alphabet people officer and a trans and non-binary officer. And you wonder why university tuition is so expensive. And there's no picture of Dan Orr here because I have seen pictures of Dan Orr. And I suppose there are, two kinds of male to female transsexuals. There's the kind that, actually makes an effort, through surgery and the like, to appear female. I mean, what Caitlyn Jenner doesn't really look like a woman, but you can see that an effort has been made there. Oh yes, here's the person. Yes, Dan Orr, wearing a T-shirt called "Abolish Prisons, Build Community." When I say that he looks like a man, I mean not one person in 100 would look at this fellow and say that's a woman. Not one person in 1,000 would say. You have these people like, Jessica Yaniv, got to be careful, is a very litigious person who lives in my province, notoriously so. Yes, with the wig or the grown out hair and the makeup and the women's clothing. Nope. Dan Orr, he's, I suppose, living proof of the maxim that you are whatever you want to be. If you claim you are a woman, then you are. And no one can gainsay that. I suppose I am genuinely shocked about how weak feminism turned out to be. That feminism for the entirety of my life has been an exceedingly powerful force, and its strength has resulted in numerous and profound changes in every aspect of our daily lives. Then about 5 years ago, a bunch of men who become women say, we're in charge now. Feminism is our thing. Safe spaces, we're taking your safe spaces. Organizations, we're taking over your organizations. Sex with women, we're women too. You have to have sex with us. Have to? Yes, you do. Because if you don't, you're transphobic. It is your duty as a cis woman to have a sex with women who are not cis women. And with few exceptions, and I salute the brave TERFs who are the exceptions, the feminists have said, yeah, okay, sure, it's yours now. Do with it what you will, and we will take up arms with you against those evil TERFs, those evil, evil women who say, we want women to be women in a place for women, which was pretty much what feminism used to be, as I understand it. But again, feminism, a paper tiger. There's no other way to describe it. Okay, so I see that I'm back to Canada here again. Sorry about this, but this story is too funny. Alberta man said decals he was selling depicting a train running over protesters are intended merely as a source of amusement. Matt Busey made the decals, which depicts a train with the words Alberta Strong and stick figures scurrying around it to avoid being struck. One of the figures is falling out of the train, while another appears to have been tossed in the air after being struck. On Thursday, an Alberta woman said she complained to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police about a decal bearing an energy services company logo below a cartoon depicting what appeared to be the sexual assault of 17-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg. The company's general manager, Doug Sparrow, did not return message seeking comment, but has denied having anything to do with it. Busey, who works at an Edmonton body shop, said he wasn't initially planning on selling the train decal until he posted the one he made for himself, and the post blew up. Honestly, I found it funny, and that's about it. It's purely entertainment. On Thursday afternoon, a Facebook user with the name Penny Ramone said they were reporting the decal to police as a death threat. The post was either removed or made private shortly after. Busey said he's not encouraging violence. It's a joke. Some people are offended by everything, and you can't tiptoe around everything because some people are going to be offended. Okay. Do people not understand how trains work? You see, cars travel on roads, but cars can travel off roads. They can switch from lane to lane. They can drive on the sidewalk. You know, if a car driver happened to be particularly homicidal, he could chase someone onto open ground. Trains run on tracks, so the only people who are in danger of being hit or scattered, if you will, by trains are those people who have willingly gone onto the tracks. Now, why would they go onto the tracks? To stop the train. A train is a very, very powerful moving object. And I guess it used to be that one of the things that children were taught when they were young was about trains. If there were trains in the vicinity, to never, ever go on the train tracks. Because, people can survive being hit by a car, but you're not likely to survive being hit by a train. But the people supporting the blockades in Canada seem to have got it into their head that apparently, trains have this magical power to assassinate those people who are opposed to the blockades. Now, I have more about that Greta Thunberg image. This is from the New York Post. The man who designed the image used in sexually graphic Greta Thunberg sticker speaks out. Oh, this story is a good one. On an Argentinian tattoo artist, and with an intro like that, it's got to be good, who illustrated the picture used for a sexually explicit Greta Thunberg sticker, has slammed the Canadian oil field company that allegedly altered the image. Germain Gabriel Canala, who designed the image of a naked woman shown from the back with a man's hands pulling her braids, posted on Instagram that the design had been plagiarized. They stole my design. I never make my drawing with that purpose. Canala then shared his 2016 image, which shows the design without the Greta text or the Excite Energy Services logo included on the sticker. The sticker made was originally a tattoo design used by me. Of course, it was never meant to be used for that purpose, this disgusting purpose. It sucks. Greta said that her critics were getting desperate. So there's all this talk about rape or statutory rape. Greta Thunberg is 17 years old. Now, this image isn't very bad taste, but there's no suggestion in the image that this is anything but consensual. But the police have been notified, as always, that I suspect it's not long before children scrawling on walls with crayons are going to have their collars felt by the RCMP, because it's been deemed that these images are problematic, or perhaps because they violate Disney copyright. So we are going to move now into Theater Thursday. And the movie that we are discussing is from the year 2000, and it is called Sexy Beast. And it is made by a fellow called Jonathan Glazer. I'm sure you've seen, most of you have seen some of his work in one form or another. Actually, I love Jonathan Glazer to death. He's only made 3 feature films. I suspect that's because of, well, let's put it this way. The people associated with him, there was a collection, but Chris Blackwell made a company, and they put out these collections of rock videos. Mark Romanek, one of the greats. Does he get to direct films anymore? It doesn't seem like it. Michel Gondry, Another one of the greats, another particular favorite of mine. Does he get to direct films anymore? Well, I guess he does in France. They had him doing the the Green Lantern movie with Seth Rogen. Why you'd put Seth Rogen in a superhero movie? But apparently the studio was unhappy with the movie, and I suppose what happened is that. Well, let me ask this question. Why would you hire Michel Gondry to direct your superhero movie if you did not want a Michel Gondry take on the superhero genre? So Jonathan Glazer does not want to make movies about people wearing spandex, so he doesn't get to make very many movies. His movies have come out in the year 2000, 2004, 2013, and supposedly, according to Wikipedia, there is an untitled Jonathan Glazer project scheduled for 2020. Jonathan Glazer has made videos for Massive Attack, Blur, Radiohead, Street Spirit, Jamiroquai's Virtual Insanity, which creates an optical illusion, giving the impression that the singer of the band can, fly on the ground. Karma Police by Radiohead, my all-time favorite video, Rabbit in Your Headlights by Uncle. He has made a number of commercials. I would in particular recommend two that he made for the beer Stella Artois. One is called Last Orders and one is called Whip Round. I'll explain something about Stella Artois, which is owned by the evil InBev company. That in Europe, Stella Artois is a Belgian beer. It's just considered an everyday beer, nothing special. But in Britain and in the rest of the world, it is sold as a prestige beer. In fact, their slogan at the time was reassuringly expensive. Now, of course, in Britain, Stella Artois is called wife beater, and that needs some explaining. Wife beater refers to a sleeveless T-shirt, and I suppose it's called a wife beater, perhaps after Stanley Kowalski from A Streetcar Named Desire, because the cliche or the stereotype is that the person who wears such a undergarment is likely to be the same sort of person who would, beat his wife or girlfriend. And of course, Stella Artois is not an upmarket beer in Britain, hence wife beater. But he made a video called Whip Round, and Whip Round is another British expression. It means asking for money for a specific purpose. And in this case, it's to buy a crate of Stella Artois. And it's a bunch of skating priests on a frozen lake set to Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody #2. It is absolutely delightful. And the Last Orders, which stars Denis Lavant, who is the French actor who is also the star of the Rabbit in Your Headlights video. There's an old man, the patriarch of the family. It's in the country. He's on his deathbed, and he has some final wishes. There's a particular flower which he wants to smell. And so Lavant shinnies up some tree and grabs some, falling heavily to the ground. And so the old man smells them. And so he wants some honey. He wants some, raw honey right from the comb. And again, Lavant exposes himself to danger to get the honey. And he has one final request, which is for Stella Artois. And everyone gasps for some reason. So he heads off to the village and he buys a mug of it. And there's some ancient truck taking him home, which bounces, and he loses some of the beer, and he drinks some more of it. And it's a very hot day. And by the time that he gets to the house, there is no more beer. There's just little foam at the bottom of the glass. And coincidentally, a priest has arrived for the extreme unction, and Denis Lavant has an idea that the priest is taking off his shawl. He exchanges it with the mug with Lavant, and the priest enters the room holding an empty Stella Artois mug to the everyone in the room, including the patriarch, is enraged, and then Levant, indicates what's happened. There's no talking in any of these videos. He makes the universal drinky drinky sign, pointing at the priest. He also made a much acclaimed and really fantastic commercial for Levi Strauss called Odyssey, which is about, well, people flying. And Jonathan Glazer seems to have kind of an obsession with the idea of people flying. So, Sexy Beast, let me say something about his other films. Birth is a film that came out in 2004, and it stars Nicole Kidman and Danny Houston, and it is a beautiful and mysterious film about reincarnation, but it was absolutely sunk by a phony media hysteria about pedophilia. His film Under the Skin in 2013, which stars Scarlett Johansson, it's about aliens, but it's not the typical alien movie. I thought the movie was rather astonishing, but it is, as they say, an art film. So you have been warned. Sexy Beast is a gangster film, and there are a lot of gangster cliches in it. Let's see. Retired gangster brought out of retirement for one last heist. Yeah, we've seen that before. Also, it's a cinch or a piece of piss, as the Cockneys would say. But then, of course, it never turns out to be a cinch. Actually, in this movie, it does. There's a lot of conventions which are subverted. The movie is written by Louis Mellis and David Scinto. The very impressive cinematography is by Ivan Bird. Most of the music comes from Uncle, the British electronica band that I mentioned, and another electronic band called South. And the movie stars Ray Winston, Ian McShane, James Fox, and Sir Ben Kingsley, as you have never seen him before, and that is no exaggeration. The movie is set in Spain, in the Costa del Sol, in the desert, in the mountains. And this is where a lot of well-off British people go to retire. And our hero, Gal Dove, Gal short for Gary, apparently, although I don't hear that name in the film. The name is significant. Gal, well, it means a woman, and Dove is a symbol of peace. He is a hard man, and of course, Ray Winston has played any number of hard men in both British and American films. I suppose Americans would be most familiar with him for his role in The Departed. He's out of the game. We learned that he spent 9 years in prison. 9 years in prison is a very long time, and he very much does not want to go to prison. I mean, who would? Who would want to go back to prison? And what's touching about this film is that it is a paean to the institution of marriage, that one does not see very many films which are present a positive view of marriage. But the retired gangster is married to a woman called Dee Dee, who is played by Amanda Redman. And we learn later, we don't learn it from Gal, that she is a retired porn star. That she used to make 16 millimeter films were made starring her, and apparently she's a bit of a cult figure for those people who are interested in vintage pornography. They have a couple who are their best friends. They're practically inseparable, and they're played by Kevin Kendall and Julianne White. There is also a Spanish boy who appears to be 11 years old, named Enrique, although his name is not mentioned in the film, played by Alvaro Monge. And you can see that this is like a family. The Spanish boy is a surrogate son to Ray Winston and his wife, and the other couple, he could be Gal's older brother, say, or the wife could be H, he's called, or his wife could be Dee Dee's sister. There's that level of closeness. The film begins with Ray Winston baking, or basting, one could say, in the sun. It's not my idea of a good time to roast like that, but he enjoys it very much, especially since he is taken against England. It's a shithole, he says. Everyone, it's always raining. It's always dark. Everyone is wandering around, depressed, worried, and he's gotten out. He is well out of it, and he enjoys the heat, even as it's, one of the things that intense sunlight does is that it heats up the brain and it induces a kind of drunkenness. And he is so drunk on the heat that after he gets to his feet at poolside, he can barely shuffle to put on his footwear, his sandals. The boy is at the other end of the pool, and there's some good-humored banter between them, where Gal, says, "Mush, put your back into it." And we see a boulder, an enormous boulder, coming down the side of a mountain, and it leaps into the pool, and it misses Gal by inches. There's an enormous, shocking splash, and it has gone to the bottom, and it has damaged the pool. And the pool has a heart motif, two conjoined hearts, symbolizing the love of Gal and Dee Dee. Now, a lot of critics have spoken of this as a homoerotic film. I suppose you could make that argument. What we see is a very clear distinction between the domesticity of the retired gangsters and the all-male club of the gangsters who are still in it. And the use of, violence and the invasion of space and such like, which could be seen as, I suppose, homoerotic by the gangsters, and is directed against Gal, who is, he says he's not up to it anymore. He's gone to seed. He's overweight. He was clearly a very handsome young man, a strong young man. This is later pointed out, but he just doesn't care about that anymore. He's got his wife, who he dearly loves. What does he love? He loves the sun. He loves his drink. He loves his fags, and he loves his wife. And into every life a little rain must fall, as they say. And the boulder has smashed the two hearts, and it has made a hole in the earth, a symbolic hole in the earth. And out of this hole come demons. That there is not very much plot in this film, which is good, because a lot of movies are over plotted. There's not a lot of mystery in this film either. It's been pointed out by one critic. It's like a short story, and I think that is good for films. So they go into town, the two couples, and H and his wife they show up late, and it's clear that something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. And they have got a call um, from a fellow called Don Logan. And apparently, Don Logan is, it's not a name that you want to mention. And of course, there's suspense brought up here. I mean, okay, so there's this gangster from London called Don Logan. I mean, how scary could he be? I should mention that Jonathan Glazer is one of the many directors who has been much influenced by Stanley Kubrick, and we see a little homage to 2001 when Gal is having a nightmare, and we see him seated alone at a table in the middle of the desert, eating dinner. And there's clearly an homage as well to John Boorman's Point Blank, which is, I don't know, perhaps the most influential modern gangster film. It came out in, 1968, I believe. And there's a name check to Lee Marvin, some Cockney rhyming slang. Lee Marvin equals starving. And we see Don Logan pacing quickly, marching down a hallway. Clack, 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 clack. He is a man of action. Of course, there's a big difference between Don Logan's character and the character of Lee Marvin in Point Blank. Lee Marvin's character in Point Blank, he just wants justice. He wants retribution. He has been cheated, and he wants what is rightfully his. What Don Logan wants is something that no one could ever deliver. People say that Don Logan is a sociopath, a psychopath. Let's just say that he's an evil, deeply evil man. And it's clear that there's very much a jealousy. We find out that he had a sex with H's wife 3 years before. But more than that, there is an envy. Because Don Logan is a man who's never going to be happy. And it enrages him that Gal and H and their wives are out of it. And they live in boring domesticity on the Costa del Sol. They're away from all the juice, all of the action. Now, Don Logan has a job for them. A heist. And Jonathan Glazer does something very, very clever in this film. I don't think I've ever seen it quite done this way before. There's a certain amount of exposition, narrative exposition, which is required in films. How are you going to deliver that which is necessary to the audience without boring them, or without bringing everything to a halt? In The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, Joseph Sargent solved that problem by showing a trainee subway car operator being instructed by a veteran. That was very clever. But what Glazer does here is that Don Logan gets the details of the scheme and the principles in it from a man higher up on the chain. So we go from higher up to Don Logan and then to Gal. Now, the first half of the conversation is in London. The second half of the conversation is in Spain. And we go back and forth and back and forth. And this is later repeated several times, parts of it, in order to enforce a unity on the picture. So we are introduced to Teddy Bass, who is played by the great Ian McShane. And after seeing this movie, it strikes me that being smiled at by Ian McShane must be one of the world's most terrifying experiences. That Teddy Bass is gangster number one, and he meets James Fox at an orgy, a high-class orgy. It's like Eyes Wide Shut, only with uglier people. And the sexual ambiguity, again, I suppose there's a bit of a nod to the Cray twins. One of the Cray twins was homosexual. They were both homicidal murderers, and they were both, well, crazy. Again, Teddy Bass he's not crazy. He's just evil. And so you see the gangster hierarchy there. And Gal he was never near the top. I suppose he never wanted to be near the top. One presumes he just fell into this. He happened to be unlucky enough to spend 9 years in the Nick, lucky enough to put together enough money to retire to the south of Spain. So the gag is that James Fox is the head of a private bank, which is impregnable. This is another, gangster movie cliche or crime movie cliche, but excellent, art direction there. That apparently, cheap means were used to give a very realistic illusion of a solid steel vault door that is 3 feet thick. And so, where there's a will, there's a fucking way, and there is a way, says Ian McShane. And he has devised a very clever way to get into this impregnable vault. This is withheld from us until much later. But Don Logan, Ben Kingsley. Ben Kingsley is not a large man. He's not tall. He's not broad. He is not anything like Ray Winston. But he completely dominates Gal and his wife, and H and his wife. He's like a drill sergeant. But he's like a super drill sergeant because he has no fear. He has no fear of death. He has no fear of pain. And people do not like to get into physical disputes with people like that. Also, he uses words as weapons. Even words as simple as yes and no. A long string of no, 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 no. You've heard of a man that will not take no for an answer? Well, Don Logan is not going to take no for an answer. It's not simply that, Logan has exposed himself, that he's promised Teddy Bass that Gal is going to be part of the team that pulls off the heist. So obviously, he would be embarrassed, lose face, or, perhaps worse if he didn't come through. But there's, more to it, to this character, because he just feels the need to physically dominate people. Now, the scenes that revolve around Don Logan, there's not a lot of camera movement in them. There are very long takes, again, like Kubrick, and you see the subtlety in the acting, particularly the change in facial expression and the angling of bodies. No one wants to look Don Logan in the face. No one wants to talk to him. In fact, they strain as much as possible to turn themselves away from him. This is how afraid they are of him. Don Logan's assault on Gal is that, he was once something, now he's worthless. He's married to a porn star. He had sex with H's wife. It just never stops. Every single possible thing that he can dredge up. What do you think? This is the world of fortune? You think you can make your dough and fuck off, leave the table? Thanks, Don. See you, Don. Off to sunny Spain now, Don. Fuck off, Don. Lying in your pool like a fat blob laughing at me. You think I'm going to have that? You really think I'm going to have that, you ponce? All right, I'll make it easy for you. God knows you're fucking trying. Are you going to do the job? It's not a difficult question. Are you going to do the job? Yes or no? And then some really inventive foul language. I must say, there's the usual F's and C's, but how about this? You're the problem. You're the fucking problem, you fucking Dr. White honking jamrag fucking spunk bubble. That is really David Mamet worthy. Gal's position is that despite the insults levied at him, despite the insults levied at his beloved wife, and H and his wife, he is not going to do the job. And so Don Logan departs. And he is waiting to get on a plane. We see him get on the plane, and then he decides that he is not going to be gainsaid. He is Don Logan. And he comes up with a very clever way to get off the plane. Stop the plane. Smokes a cigarette before the plane is taken off. I suppose even in 2000, it was illegal to fly on to smoke at any time on Spanish aircraft. And then he threatens physical violence against the staff of the plane and other passengers. And he has a rather genius way of getting out of this, which I won't spoil the surprise. He goes back to the villa, and this time he's not taking any prisoners. And it's going to be physical assault. He's going to drag Gal off by his hair, if needs be. And then the little Spanish boy, I like that kid. He's a brave kid, decides to risk it all for his surrogate family. And there is an eruption of violence. And then we go back to the heist. And, you know, subverting expectations, it turns out that the heist is, as the Cockneys like to say, a piece of piss. But there's a complication, which is that Don Logan has not returned to London. Where is Don Logan? And we get a, so to say, a gentler, a more nuanced version of the Don Logan treatment from Teddy Bass. Only it's even more frightening because of the restraint. Where's Don? Well, I don't know. Where is he? Well, he's not here. Well, I know that he flew back. How do you know that he flew back? Because he called me. He called you from where? He called me from Heathrow. Why did he call you from Heathrow? I don't know why he called me from Heathrow. And again and again and again. And he keeps going back to the same point. It's clear that he does not believe Gal, that something has happened to Don and that Gal is responsible. Now, I can't say that I have ever much enjoyed movies which feature a lot of underwater photography. I mean, a movie like Thunderball, the Bond film, apparently there's a fight going on, and I can't tell one person from the other, and like, what's going on? How long is this going to last for? There is underwater photography in this film, about 10-15 minutes of it. It is very exciting, very novel. It has to do with the means by which the heist is perpetrated. And the heist is a success. And Gal has been promised 2 to 3% of the cut. And it's an enormous cut. And he wasn't interested in the money anyway, which is, you know, good for him, as it turns out. But he does get one thing. He manages to take a small, romantic, but highly valuable memento from the heist. And Don Logan is the creature who has, erupted from the bowels of hell, and he is compared to, I suppose, a feral rabbit, you could say. We see Chekhov's shotgun earlier in the film, and it turns out, subverting sexual roles, that the men, or at least a little Spanish boy and H, that they're not very good with rifles. But Dee Dee is. That You could compare this movie. It's an interesting contrast between this movie and Straw Dogs. That this is an assault on a family. Now, Gal is willing, he is not going to give up his family or his surrogate family. Whereas Dustin Hoffman in Straw Dogs decides to risk his wife's life for a stranger. What an odd man he was. Now, so Gal, he goes to London. The heist goes off without a hitch. Piece of piss. But is he going to get out alive? That's the big problem, because Teddy Bass has taken a personal interest in him, and you do not want Teddy Bass taking a personal interest in you, and you especially do not want him giving you a ride to the airport. Neither do you want him asking you for change from a 20-pound note. Again, I won't spoil how that ends up, but there is a unity that is restored at the end of the film, and Gal loves Dee Dee. When he calls her from London, and he lists all the different ways that he loves her. And then finally he says, I've run out of ways to say how much I love you. And it's a rare thing in a gangster film or a crime film to see this. What do you normally get in crime films? You get moles, gangsters, moles. I suppose Dee Dee could be a gangster's mole, but of course, as Ben Kingsley rather cruelly points out, Dee Dee is past her prime. Of course, Ray Winston is past his prime as well. I mean, it's really a daring choice of this movie to go with actors and actresses who look like normal people, in their 40s or even older than that. And the acting, as I have suggested, is outstanding. And Ben Kingsley is an absolute revelation that if you see this film, you will never be able to regard him in the same way again. I like to be surprised when I go to see movies. I was talking about surprises earlier with regard to Robert Zemeckis, that I know that audiences do not like surprises. There's lots of surprises in this film, subverting expectations, subverting the genre. The musical score is quite good, and particularly the music that is provided for Don Logan, the electronic music. It just, a musical form of the force of nature that Don Logan is. And the movie opens up with one of the great punk tunes of the 1970s, which is called Peaches by a band called the Stranglers. And Stranglers were a very unusual punk band. I saw them play twice in 1976. They had an organ player who had a beard, and punk bands didn't have organ players or beards. But Peaches is a really sleazy song, and it is very appropriate to this film of, people sweating. This is exceedingly, besides, being clever, and the camera work, particularly in the action scenes, is exceedingly inventive, as one would expect from Jonathan Glazer. Everything comes together in this film. I found it, engrossing, terrifying, surprising, and delightful. Those are my thoughts about Sexy Beast. On the book club tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a comedy, a gentle but hilarious book about late Victorian England called The Diary of Nobody by George and Whedon Gross Smith. So, yes, Ricky Bullock says the demonic rabbit reminded me of Donnie Darko. Well, Sexy Beast was first. Okay, so we got anything else from the chat here? The underwater scene in Top Secret is one of the greatest things ever shot. Yes, the underwater scene in Top Secret is great. Everything in Top Secret is great. Airplane is a very, very funny film, but Top Secret, I think, is funnier. I don't know. It's an objection. You know, it's an unusual opinion, I suppose, minority opinion, but that's mine. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you would like to donate the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Thank you all again for tuning in. Have a great night. I will be back at 4 p.m. Pacific time of Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Nighty night.